In this corner, weighing in just 1.5 ounces, the terror of the Terrorcons is thrilling 30's Thunder Thighs Arcee. And in this corner, coming in at a spry 1.4 ounces, the Amazon of the aerial box is Earthrise Ghostface Arcee. And finally, in this corner, at a whopping 1.7 ounces, the Conquistadora of the Quintessence Studio Series Lipsticksaurus Arcee. Let's get it on!
Oh, yeah. Oh, body slam. Oh, yeah.
So, how long have you been single for?
Welcome back to Hobbies with Jose, everybody. So good to have you back, and it's good to be back. Today we are finally going to take a look at a triple threat of Arcees and try to determine which one's going to come out on top. So for the sake of organization, we are going to split things up into 7 categories, starting with... Kicking things off is the thrilling 30's Arcee packaging in a classic plastic clamshell, which we really don't see anymore nowadays. And we probably never will, too. The biggest benefit of this type of packaging, though, is that you get the best view of the figure, and from multiple angles, too. Plus, all the accessories are nicely splayed out to the side as well. And bonus, this comes with a comic book, too. How awesome is that? And on the back, we get some gorgeous shots of both alt and vehicle mode. None of this CGI rendering crap. These are the actual figures, and I love it for that. Although it does look like bot mode is slightly mistransformed in the back, but that's no biggie. Plus we get a nice classic tech specs grid at the bottom as well. No red plastic necessary to read it too, which if you were into that, it might be a negative for you. Plus we get a nice detailed description of the Arcee character too, which this pertains more closely to her IDW version, which is great. Next up we have the Earthrise packaging, which is more of what we're used to nowadays. Definitely a more boxy look with an angled side, but a very good view of the figure still. We have lost the side views of the figure, but at least they're taken up by some nice artwork. And that depiction of Arcee is so nice, although that backpack is a bit misleading though. Still a great piece of artwork though. And the other side has a more general depiction of Earthrise as a whole, which looks fantastic. And on the back, some fairly decent renders of both modes, which I do wish they would have continued taking photos of the actual figures, but this is the direction they went with. But we are of course now told that the figure transforms in 15 steps. No real description of the figure to speak of other than Arcee. Thanks, Hasbro. And finally, we have the most recent offering of Arcee, and that's in the Studio Series 86 subline for the Transformers animated movie. Now, Studio Series for the most part has kept the same overall design for their packaging, but they did have an update recently where they've now increased the size of the picture in the front of the box at the cost of being able to view the actual figure. That window is now tiny. And the reason they've done that? No more plastic on the windows. It's a bit of a trade-off, and some of us have even found Transformers with missing heads at retail. So hopefully Hasbro does find a different solution for this. But that piece of artwork for Arcee is absolutely badass. She is jumping right out of the animated movie with extra detailing and weathering. And on one side, we get a close-up view of that gorgeous noggin of hers. I do like the expression that they've given her too. Those eyes looking slightly pissed with that wicked smile. Very nice. And on the other side, a much fuller view of the entire figure. This is going to come in very handy. And on the back, some nice renders of both bot and vehicle mode, which we're told she transforms in 18 steps. Right below that, we're also shown how she can be displayed with the backdrop that's included. Pretty nice. And to the left of that, because it's in multiple languages, just the briefest of descriptions of her from the movie. So when comparing these 3 packages, 2 of them are very similar to each other, and they are what we've come to expect with packages nowadays. But I do have to give this category to Thrilling 30's. Even though it's a little bit messier to open up and it's tougher to store, it's much more beneficial for us as a consumer to see what we're actually buying. Plus, come on, free comic. You don't get better than that. So round 1 goes to Thrilling 30's Arcee. So before we actually start with the figures proper, here's a little bit of trivia for you. The name Arcee is actually a play on words. You see, it's an abbreviation for radio-controlled, typically radio-controlled cars. You get it? Because of cars? Bet you didn't know that, huh? Oh, you did? Oh, okay. Starting with the thrilling 30s, we see that her overall sculpting has kept up surprisingly well. Not a lot of actual sculpted panel lines to speak of, but she has an abundance of style. Great proportions, yeah, a little bit of a wide hip, but nothing out of the ordinary. And she looks so badass just having a regular standing pose. And of course, she's always going to have some kind of a backpack on her. Nothing that exactly matches with what we see in the cartoons or in the comics. But the one we have here is a pretty decent size, and it doesn't stick out too much from the back. The only extra bit of kibble we have is tucked away underneath, which still doesn't seem to be getting in the way too much. And that sculpted head is quite good, except there's two things taken away from it. Number one, I do think those side buns modeled after Leia are just a tad bit large. They cause her to have a bit of a tiny face. And of course, the second thing, I'm not a big fan of light piping. The entirety of the back of the head is a clear blue, which works pretty good in the right conditions, but those conditions have to be exact. Either you're gonna have too much light coming through, or those eyes are gonna look completely dead. But again, not a huge detractor for me since I'm gonna fix that, but still not really my preference. Now thankfully during this Transformers period, it wasn't as common to have such hollow sections. There are some peg holes for the weapons, which we'll get to later on, but if you look at the back, we get to see the beginning of the hollowness of these figures. At this point, I'd say it doesn't look too bad. This is pretty acceptable. Next up, Earthrise Arcee, and we're just gonna focus on the sculpting because she does have some major issues, but the sculpting is not really one of them. This is essentially a near-perfect updated design to the original G1 incarnation. We have plenty of added panel lines just to give it that little bit of extra detailing. And her proportions in bot mode are just fantastic. Now let's talk a little bit about that backpack, shall we? This isn't really a sculpting issue, but it's mostly how they decided to implement it onto the figure. Now she does have her traditional backpack sitting right behind her, but sitting right behind that is the entirety of the rest of the vehicle mode. Thankfully though, it can be removed. She has a gimmick where she can ride it as some sort of a hoverboard, so at the very least we can set it aside for right now. But without it, she looks a heck of a lot better. Now this head sculpt fixes almost every issue from the previous iteration. Those metallic head buns are now properly proportioned, giving us a much more naturally sized face. And speaking of which, we have no light piping on this figure thankfully. That glossy blue paint on the eye shines perfectly well. But I won't jump ahead too much as she is missing something else. That'll be for the next category. But one thing I do have to mention now is just how hollow these legs have become. It's really at a point now where it starts to become pretty distracting, almost forcing us to buy a third-party kit just to complete the look. Apart from that though, the sculpting on this figure is just phenomenal. And finally we have Studio Series 8616 Arcee, which is a very heavy retooling of the thrilling 30s mold, but overall, it does work. We essentially have the same arms, front of the chest piece, and front portion of the vehicle. Everything else from the midsection, legs, to the rear of the vehicle is completely redesigned. But the overall panel lining and design has been made to match with the previous mold, while at the same time trying to give us a more accurate G1 look of Arcee, which is kind of the purpose of Studio Series 86. And you'll notice some of the existing molding has been improved too. Those same arms no longer lack the peg holes for the weapons. And thankfully that head mold no longer has light piping. Those eyes are now painted, and although they're not as glossy as the Earthrise, they still look nice. Now unfortunately, some of the newly designed items do come with a couple of issues too. The top of the backpack still looks okay, but because of the new transformation they had to add more of the rear of the vehicle. That just added more kibble at the bottom. Thankfully, that can also be removed, which for the most part fixes that whole issue. But unfortunately those legs are just as hollow as they are with Earthrise. And they also added some fresh circular peg holes on the sides too. But overall, this is a very good remastered version of Thrilling 30's Arcee. So for this category, it's almost 2 against 1, as 2 of them do have very similar sculpting, but a couple of key factors that help out Earthrise over the other 2 is that she has more modern sensibilities. One is just the look of the shoulders, as we'll get a closer look into the articulation category. They look a lot more cleaner and just better proportioned than the other 2. And the second thing is the fact that she has a fake chest, which I'm always okay with as long as it's properly implemented. But the fact that her chest doesn't become the front of the vehicle means that she can be sculpted much more proportionally for bot mode. Unfortunately, you do see the front of the vehicle right behind her head, so the illusion is a little bit broken there. But overall, she has the superior design. So this Super Cat point goes to Earthrise Arcee. As for the paint, none of the figures have an overly extravagant amount of it, as they're mostly sculpted in the properly colored plastic. But what is painted on Thrilling 30's is damn good. The white and pink that's painted over the black plastic midsection came out very flawless. and there's an excellent shine to it as well. And the paint that's picked out over the sides of the legs matches very well with the existing pink plastic. Probably what sticks out the most though are the black plastic pieces throughout the body. We've never really seen Arcee colored in such a way, and it's quite striking. The portions that are painted, like the front of the feet and the hands, have a very nice gloss to them. Plus, the black added to the hood of the vehicle is extremely clean too, and it helps to make that Autobot symbol pop. But the one piece of color that sticks out the most has to be that metallic blue. A very good portion is used to simulate the headlights, and that is a darn good look. And there's a couple of sections sprinkled out throughout the body, mainly on the abdomen and right below the knees. It adds some very nice highlights to the figure overall. Now, probably the least noticeable but still appreciated is the slight pink wash on the mouth. It's not the very obvious red lips that we have on Studio Series, but the subtlety of it still looks great. And if you notice on those metallic side rolls, those ridges are painted with what looks like a very light gray. It's almost hard to tell that it's there, but it does add to the overall flavor of the figure. Overall, very nice indeed. Next up on Earthrise, we really just get the absolute bare minimum of paint here. Everything is just pink or white plastic, so there isn't a lot of paint that's needed to begin with. But what is here or isn't here is almost perplexing. On the vehicle mode, the white parts are picked off with a flat white paint, which is kind of an odd choice. And for the torso and abdomen sections, there is a nicely matching pink paint. Again, not very glossy at all, but it gets the job done. What is super glossy is the gray on the abdomen. It really sticks out. Unfortunately, they didn't continue that paint on the back of the figure. Speaking of lacking paint, we get to the face, which, again, the eyes look great, but we are lacking the light pink for her actual face. And that has to be the biggest deterrent for an overall great head sculpt. But overall, this figure just barely gets the job done. And lastly, Studio Series Arcee has a lot of the same paint apps as Thrilling 30's. Of course, minus the black and the metallic blue. This is more G1ified. But the paint that it has on here isn't too bad. There's a nice glossy pink paint on the arms that's probably a little bit too glossy compared to the plastic. But there's some nice gray paint in the abdomen that's not as glossy as Earthrise, but I think it's better for that. However, it's just as lacking on the sides and the back. Now, the glossy white that's used for the vehicle mode does perfectly match the glossiness of the pink plastic. And thankfully, we have a nicely painted light pink face with the lipstick and the blue eyes, capturing it all together. Overall, this category has to go to Thrilling 30's just for the added metallic blues and the blacks. But a very close second has to be Studio Series for giving us the best painted face, something that unfortunately Earthrise really dropped the ball in. But once again, the Super Cat point goes to Thrilling 30's. Articulation for Thrilling 30's, her head is on a ball joint. Can look up that far, down not so much, but can turn a full 360. At certain angles though, the head gets extremely loose. Shoulders don't quite have a 90 coming out. Can rotate 360 but hindered with the backpack. There is a bicep swivel, way more than 90 at the elbows. Nothing for the wrist though, and also nothing for the waist. Nice forward high kick for the legs. Can move back that far, but outward not so much, again due to the design. Can rotate above the knee, and a very good knee bend. And feet can move up and down, but sadly, no ankle pivot. For Earthrise, the head seems to be on a very tight ball joint. There isn't a lot of up or down or side to side. Can pretty much just rotate 360, but the shoulders have an excellent range. Can also do 360, but hindered by the backpack. Bicep swivel, another excellent elbow joint, and the wrists can move up and down, but no rotation. We do have full waist rotation. Legs can move forward about that much, and back about that much, and outward just a bit. Pretty tight thigh rotation, an excellent double jointed knee, and feet can move up and down, and it seems like it's a single ratchet ankle pivot. And Studio Series Arcee does share a lot of the articulation as Thrilling 30's. The head can look up an excellent amount, and can look down a bit too. Full 360 rotation, and this time with no looseness too. This is a very solid joint. Shoulder joints have the same outward limitation, not quite 90. Full 360, also hindered by the backpack. Bicep swivel, nice elbows, still no wrists, but we now have an added waist swivel. Can kick forward that far, back that far, rotation above the knees, and an excellent knee bend. Feet can move up and down, and have a full ankle tilt. Very nice. So this round could have easily gone to Earthrise Arcee with her improved shoulder joints and her turning wrists. The major thing holding her back was her very weak legs. So the fact that Studio Series is an improvement over Thrilling 30's means that she gets a Super Cat point. Thrilling 30's Arcee is no stranger to accessories, as she is jam-packed with them. Apart from her traditional blaster, she also has this bigger badass gun too. And on top of that, these nicely molded translucent blue swords, which can also be used as guns too. That's badass. Now the other two, however... Fittingly enough, Earthrise Ghostface Arcee has this ghostly looking gun that's in a cloudy lavender plastic. The molding itself does not look bad at all, it's just the choice in semi-clear plastic. And as for the supposedly improved Studio Series version, she only has the lone blaster that's not even painted. So here we have a definite clear winner. So, just taking the transformation into consideration, this is hot garbage. I don't like to be overly negative, but this transformation blows. Super finicky, nothing wants to stay in place, and when you do get it completed, you get a bar of soap. But I am getting ahead of myself. This transformation, no bueno. This transformation, on the other hand, so satisfying. Every single step of the transformation just feels so good, and the sound of those clicks, so satisfying. I absolutely love this one. And now Studio Series builds upon all of that, adds extra step to hide the legs inside of the alt mode. And those extra steps feel just as satisfying as well. Truly an improvement upon Thrilling 30's. The winner here is clear, and the Super Cat point goes to Studio Series. So the beauty of the Thrilling 30's alt mode is that they weren't trying to recreate G1. They had more flexibility to give us something a little bit different, just a little bit fresher. And it really shows with this alt mode. I think the decision to use the legs for part of the alt mode was overall genius. It adds to the enjoyment of the transformation, but we can very clearly see the leg components in the alt mode. They're not hidden very well. And the only other real drawback for the vehicle is the lack of a rear section. There's a slight hint of tail lights molded in, but nothing colored. Now what is excellently molded is the interior. We get some nicely defined seats, and a console with a very well-defined steering wheel, and lots of buttons and doodads and what looks like even a little screen. That's going to be fun to paint. Also, while I really don't care for this too much, there is excellent weapon storage for all the accessories included. Even with the translucent weapons applied to the side, it does not look silly. Just adds to the overall badassery. And you could still roll it freely too, they don't get in the way. But the extra bit of color does add so much to the alt mode. All of that black surrounding the Autobot logo running all the way to the back, and the metallic blue just blaring in the front really brings this vehicle to life. This vehicle looks like it goes fast. This vehicle does not. I mentioned the bar of soap before, and that's pretty much what it looks like. Now the reason we get such a bloated looking vehicle is because she is a complete shell former. And of course the lack of a rear section is another issue, but that is par for the course nowadays. Even the interior is mostly just hinted at. We do get the backs of the seats defined and the center divider, but the steering wheel and the console itself are just so tiny, you could barely say that they're there. And the milky lavender plastic is still an odd choice and not really G1 in the slightest. Now it does have storage for the only weapon that it comes with, but it doesn't hide it at all. If you look at the front of the vehicle, it sticks out like a sore thumb. Oof, that looks bad. And finally, we have Studio Series. The fact that they took a mold that wasn't trying to exactly replicate G1 and now retroactively try to replicate G1 is impressive. And I have to say that by and large, they succeeded, especially in the alt mode. This is such a good rendition of G1 Arcee. And the extra retooling that they did to now hide the legs inside of the alt mode, they succeeded astoundingly. Especially considering that the vehicle doesn't get overly bloated like Earthrise. Now on the rear of the vehicle, we still see visible robot parts sticking out, but at least we now have a little bit of a more complete rear section. Complete with molded tail lights too, although they're still not painted, and the interior has also been redesigned. We get some updated seats that look a little bit more generic, but they're not bad. However, the console itself has now been overly simplified. No longer do we actually get a steering wheel that sticks out, it's just molded into the console itself. This part is a little bit unfortunate, but not a major issue. And another little drawback, instead of having the visible legs how we see in thrilling 30s, we can now see that the shoulders and arms are a little bit visible from the top of the vehicle. I do wish this part could have been covered up with some additional plastic, but it's still not the end of the world. And this version also has weapon storage for the single weapon that's included. It's held in place by the slightest amount of friction though, and seems to come off pretty easily. But all in all, it's tough to imagine us getting a better Arcee alt mode in a main line. Once again, it's pretty clear which one's the loser here, which still astounds me. It's not that old of a mold, and they started from the ground up, and this is what we got. So much potential, but what are you gonna do? And yet again, Studio Series building upon what came before, making it better, giving us improvements, and coming away with a super cat point. So at the end of the day, I have to decide which figure I had the most fun with. The one thing I liked about Earthrise, and the thing she does better than the other two, is her alt mode. Just the design of it alone, the panel lining, the detailing, the updated joints that look so much cleaner, just far and away looks better than the other two. But it's a crying shame that everything else fell so short, including many of those joints being so loose. And the transformation itself just caused the whole thing to be a bit too frustrating. Now thrilling 30s, for being an older figure, she still holds up. Her transformation is still one of the most satisfying I've ever had. But some of her joints are a little bit outdated, and she lacks certain joints that are expected in newer figures as well, which is where Studio Series comes in. She absolutely builds upon thrilling 30s to give us such a great figure, still held back a little bit by those old types of joints, but improving so much more that she overcomes that. So yeah, I definitely had the most fun with her, and she takes the crown. Well, there you have it, everyone. We have our winner, but let me know who you think comes out on top down below. I do always enjoy reading your comments, and I'm curious to know who you think is best. But remind me to never review 3 figures at once. Oh boy. Join me next week when I start customizing 3 figures at once.
Ooh, you done messed up.